City Council is now in session pursuant to RCW 42.30.110(1)(I). The City Council will now enter into executive session to discuss pending litigation. This executive session is slated to last 30 minutes. Cambridge City Council is coming out of executive session. No action will be taken. And we are now adjourning the special meeting and calling the regular meeting to order. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Baker.
Present.
Councilmember Kugler.
Present.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Here.
Mayor Herbig.
Here.
Deputy Mayor King.
Here.
Councilmember File.
Here.
Councilmember Marshall. Councilmember Marshall.
He's here.
All present.
All right. Would you all please stand and join me in the flag salute?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Unless there are any objections, the agenda will stand approved as published. Seeing no objections, the agenda stands approved. Next, we have a presentation from the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. As I've done the last two times they presented here, I'm handing the gavel over to the deputy mayor, as this is where I work in my day job, and she'll be running this portion. So I'm handing it off to Deputy Mayor O'Kane.
Thank you, Mayor. So King County Regional Homeless Authority organizational progress updates presented by the Assistant to the City Manager, Garrett Oppenheim, and KCRHA Director of Sub-Regional Planning and Equitable Engagement, Alexis Mercedes Rink. Hello, it's good to have you.
Thank you, Ms. Deputy Mayor and Mr. Mayor, council members. As you may recall, last November, the City Council authorized an agreement, an interlocal agreement with some of our fellow North King County cities and the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, and that governs our relationship with the authority. And we're lucky to have Ms. Rink here tonight to tell us some updates about how things are going there. Ms. Rink, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Garrett. And thank you again, Council, for having me tonight. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get this presentation rolling. So thank you again for having me. I'm here to cover 4 primary topics tonight. The first, providing a very brief organizational review, just specifically related to our role and scope. And then I'll be covering the core pieces to the draft 5-year plan. And we'll be covering some of the content that's included within the draft plan. And then what you can expect with regards to upcoming approval, voting and approval by our boards on that plan. I'll then be providing some information related to the North King County Subregional Implementation Plan, namely how we'd like this council to be directing us as KCRHA as we move towards just starting really developing that plan, and then close with a progress update related to the North King County agreement, as Garrett mentioned. And so before I get started, I want to take a moment to ground us in the KCRHA theory of change. This is something that we work to center in our everyday jobs here at KCRHA. And it's if we center a homeless response system that centers the voices of people with lived experience, then we will be able to meet needs and eliminate inequities in order to end homelessness for all. By way of background, I know this council's probably seen this slide a couple of times, but in terms of a quick summation, our agency was formed through an interlocal agreement that was signed in December of 2019. In 2020, the stand-up of the agency was held a bit on pause throughout the global pandemic, in which a lot of staff were deployed to other important really crisis response work. And our CEO then began in 2021. And so as we've moved through stand-up of the agency throughout the rest of 2021, 2022 was a big year in focusing on the transfer of 268 contracts and the consolidation of a number of those contracts, as well as stepping into standing up and working around severe weather, qualitative research, and service redesign. And as we move through 2023, we're continuing that work on service redesign and full passage of our 5-year plan with a goal towards transformative change. Our specific role as an agency, we are a public funder. We distribute funding through service contracts. So we oversee contracts related to homelessness response programs such as emergency shelter, diversion, rapid rehousing, and so on. We also oversee the coordinated entry system and the homelessness management information system, which is the client level database of folks that are accessing services. And we also oversee contracts related to outreach. In our planning department, we do coordination between jurisdictions as well as with system partners, and of course, working with all of our service providers around the region. A little bit about our progress to date. We, throughout 2022, engaged over 1,500 folks, both through the Understanding Unsheltered Homelessness Project and the engagement on the 5-year plan, which I'll be getting to shortly. Our emergency housing voucher program in partnership with King County Housing Authority, again, using those emergency housing vouchers that were a resource made available through the American Rescue Plan. This region saw a 100% utilization rate, meaning that over 1,400 households were able to successfully lease up and now have 10 years of housing affordability. We're working on launching our re-procurement process, so being able to re-procure contracts upcoming. And in 2022, more than 5,600 households moved into permanent housing, so moved through the system into a permanent housing option. We've been working on encampment resolutions and ensuring that those encampment resolutions are focused on housing folks, and also improved coordination and our effectiveness in severe weather response. With that bit of a progress update organizationally, I'm going to now move into how we are working towards looking at the future and some of the system level changes that we're hoping to make over the next 5 years. By way of providing a brief overview of the development going into the 5-year plan, throughout summer through fall of 2022, we launched a really widespread community engagement process, holding workshops focused on subregions, focused on systems, and then focused on subpopulations, really to try and take a multifaceted look at the various areas of the homelessness response system, bring in different perspectives, and take a comprehensive look at how homelessness response looks different geographically, how homelessness looks different for a number of subpopulations, and then how the homelessness response system interacts with a number of other systems. Throughout fall and winter, we had worked on a community review of content, looking at also how staff across the region have engaged with this. And then in January 2023, we released our first draft of the 5-year plan and opened it up for a public comment period. Throughout that process, we put out a survey which received 640 responses with an opportunity for up to 8 comments each. Our team filtered through and read through and coded over 2,000 comments through that survey, really to take an eye to and really listen to the public and what they had to say about the draft plan that we released. We engaged city staff and then also held a number of lunch and learn feedback sessions and took a number of letters and comments and emails. So really a robust comment period. And taking all of that feedback, our team spent time throughout February and March doing a dramatic restructure of the plan in service of all of that feedback. And that has brought us to now April and May, has been really focused working with our boards through a subcommittee and also just garnering their feedback on what they'd like to see the ultimate final plan look like. And so with that overview of the development process, I'd like to cover a little bit about what you can expect content-wise is in the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan first begins with a section related to scope and scale of the issue. There are many ways to count and regard how many folks are experiencing homelessness, but the message within this section remains clear that there are not enough resources to meet this need. Within this section, we detail a variety of enumeration methods, whether looking at annually or at a point in time. Also looking at different data sets based on administrative data or statistical modeling. And then in this first section of the plan, we dive into this current landscape of homelessness and really just trying to best lay out as clearly as possible the scale of the issue the plan is addressing. Within this, we uplift sub-regional data. And so drawing largely from the regional services database, which is the sub-regional planning team's comprehensive collection of all of our services in the formal homelessness response system, looking at things such as just emergency shelter beds, for example. So I highlighted here across the 7 subregions the breakdown of emergency shelter beds. In North King County, for example, has 3 service providers that offer emergency shelter. However, none of these locations are currently drop-in, meaning that individuals are not able to walk up and receive a service per se, but rather there's a call head or a wait list. And so we uplift that as one point, just a nuance within our emergency shelter system, for example. And this is part of the analysis work the team has done and included in the plan, really to highlight the nature of services in terms of sub-region around the county. We also highlight racial ethnicity and racial disproportionality that we see across folks who are experiencing homelessness. And here you can see the disproportionality of certain racial groups who are experiencing homelessness. And so when we look at point in time count representation signified by the teal and dark blue bars compared to then the lime green dotted line, which indicates the King County population as represented from the American Community Survey, you can see that Black, Hispanic, as well as American Indian, Alaska Native, or Indigenous folks are disproportionately represented among our unhoused neighbors. Moving into a little bit also our look at healthcare needs. This is another area of the plan that we have been included in the scope and scale of the issue section. It's important for us to understand the healthcare needs of people that are experiencing homelessness. And here you can see that we've identified that about 51% of folks identify as having a disability, 31% identify as having a mental health disorder, and 37% identify as having a substance use disorder. And by being able to have this information, it helps us plan for an appropriate response to help people find support they need as they transition out of homelessness. And then lastly, in our section around scope and scale of need, we also center that our work is in memoriam. 310 of our unhoused neighbors died while experiencing unsheltered homelessness last year. And so far this year, over 80 of our unhoused neighbors have perished while experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And we center these statistics not only as a reminder that our work is involved with human life, but also to remember those that we have lost and the work to end homelessness and prevent further death, really in service of and being in memoriam of these individuals. So that wraps the scope and scale of needs section. The following section of the plan really identifies what we're seeing in the current state of the homelessness response system and identifies what the future state of this system is. We look at the current state with 3 lenses. The first of these lenses being what's happening right now with our individual service provider organizations. And so when we look at our individual service provider organizations, as we've learned from robust engagement, we see challenges with organizations being able to appropriately staff, so a large number of vacancies, as well as challenges being able to provide competitive wages. With staffing challenges, there then can come challenges with data and reporting, and just the identified need also for funding, training for frontline staff to be able to carry out healing-based services. Service providers have also identified that they've seen an increased acuity of folks who are seeking their services. And when we say acuity, we mean individuals who may have complex behavioral health or healthcare needs. Additionally, the regional increase in overdose deaths has also been seen at our service provider organizations, and the emotional impact overdose deaths have had on staff who have witnessed them has been also another concern that our service provider partners have articulated has been challenging. And so that is our first level that we look at and describe and talk about in the plan. The second level that we look at is looking then at our network of homelessness services. So the connection between these service provider organizations. And so elements that have been identified here are related to data sharing between providers. So that historical breakages between being able to share client level data information between providers, referral pathways, but then also identified sub-regional gaps in services, as well as subpopulations that are not served within the homelessness response system explicitly. And then this section of the plan also discusses how our current programs are faring. So looking at a breakdown and comparison of different programs such as transitional housing, rapid rehousing, and emergency shelter in terms of rates of return to homelessness and exits to permanent housing. And then a bit of a description around how our current system operates in terms of what is someone's entryway into the homelessness response system, how are they stabilized when they are accessing services, and then what is their pathway to a permanent housing option. Taking us to the next level within the current state, we then look to system connections. In essence, what is the homelessness response system's connection to other systems of care, such as the prison system, the healthcare system, school system, and so on. And so we look at things such as data sharing, the state of just role clarity and collaboration as well. And so when we look at these three levels, the team and our partners have identified that we really are looking towards building this ideal system state, wherein when we look at every service provider is able to adequately hire and retain trained staff that carry out best practices when serving clients. When we look at our network of homelessness services, we are looking at one in which all service providers are coordinated through data, every subregion has services, and all disproportionately impacted subpopulations are served. And then when we look at our system to system connections, we're working towards a system wherein there's no missed opportunities to intercept someone before becoming homeless. And also we're having supportive transitions when someone is moving from the homelessness response system to another system. And so when we, there you go, apologies. And so with all of that issue identification, we've talked about all of the challenges facing the system. We then have a section that talks about how are we going to get to that ideal state then? And so with that, we have our action-based section, which identifies an overall goal, our metrics for success, and all of the activities. Our overall goal is to bring unsheltered people inside as quickly as possible to prevent death and further harm. So really not only does this align with our mission, but it also emphasizes our urgency around the issue of homelessness in our community. Metrics that we'll be using to measure this include evaluating and looking at things such as how many folks are accessing and entering into the homelessness response system as a way to really index against when we look at things such as how many exits do we have into permanent housing, our rates of return to homelessness after 6, 12, and 24 months, and the number of temporary and permanent housing units in the system. And where possible, we're breaking down these measures by household type, including single adults, families with children, youth, young adults, and then breaking down by race and ethnicity and program type. Now we have a lot of our materials included online, but I wanted to include just like a picture snapshot of what you can expect to see as we have in the plan, these tables that identify our key actions, the topic areas, impact, and what the current status of these are. The key action are many of which were developed across the large span of engagement, and we've tagged each key action by topic areas so we can kind of theme them. We've included these impact statements, which are intended to really speak to why we are doing this activity and how it will ultimately work on improving the metrics that I just covered. And then we included a bit of a status report as a number of these activities are already underway. Within the plan, we have 3 of these tables. The first 2 speak to a kind of prioritization within the plan. So the first table highlights activities that are taken up in years 1 and 2 of the plan. So kind of our first up strategies that we're taking up. And then we have a second table that articulates activities that we've been taking up in latter years of the plan. And it's really important to note that these first 2 tables are within the context of what is within our current budget and assuming that there are no increases to programmatic funding over the next 5 years. We then have a third table included in the plan that we're calling our Go For Strategies for Funding. As throughout this engagement process, this full process, there have been a number of activities that were identified by community partners, by people with lived experience, and by our team that are identified as keenly important towards addressing the issue of unsheltered homelessness, but we have not identified the fund source to be able to pursue that. And so we have included these activities within the table, really to be deliberate and clear that should new funding become available, these would be areas that KCRHA would invest that funding into. When we move into our approval process, it's important to uplift that we have two boards that are a part of the approval process. We have our implementation board, which is a 13-member board that votes to recommend the plan to the governing committee. The governing committee is an 11-member board committee, that includes representatives from King County, SCA, Seattle, and folks with lived experience. And that's the body that ultimately approves the plan. By way of dates to give you some grounding, the implementation board is currently scheduled to vote to recommend on May 19th, and the governing committee is scheduled to vote to approve on June 1st. And so with all of that about the 5-year plan, next, I want to talk about our next planning effort, which is getting specific to North King County. The work around our sub-regional implementation plans has just started, but part of the reason we wanted to come forward to you all tonight is to see how you all can really be a part of shaping how we even start this process of developing the documents that will be our sub-regional implementation plans. Essentially, the sub-regional implementation plan asks the question, what does it mean to implement and act on the goals within the 5-year plan within North King County? And so the approach to develop these plans has been to first identify initiatives that are included in the 5-year plan that need to be tailored to each sub-region. And in partnership with the North King County Coalition on Homelessness, we have determined that 30 of the activities listed within the 5-year plan need to be tailored to the North King County sub-region. So what this means is that some of the activities that were not identified, for example, to be tailored to the North King County sub-region usually require a region-wide standardization, or it's simply just a KCRHA administrative task. And so I'll provide an example in just a moment of what we mean when we say tailoring one of these activities. But the content within these plans really will be developed in partnership with North King County community. And so North King County Coalition on Homelessness being an important community convening space to help us in deliberation and identifying our regional partners appropriate to be shaping content in North King County. And so some of the key components of sub-regional plans, I think this is an old slide, you all might be tired of seeing this, but we've identified that there are 6 key components going into the development of these plans. First, we have our landscape of services. This is something that I've presented on a little bit, our regional services database, which is that full comprehensive online and publicly available catalog of everything that's available in every sub-region. We then have investment and funding analysis, centering and looking at the lived experiences within each sub-region, and a gaps and needs analysis. Really what we are now moving into is identifying action steps and getting clear on timelines. And those are kind of the key next pieces of development now that we've done this scoping and analysis work. We're ready to be working with North King County partners to get clear on what are the action steps that need to be taken and are appropriate for North King County. And so now I'll move into an example of how we might tailor an initiative within the 5-year plan to be specific for North King County. So one of the activities within the 5-year plan is to deploy an effective communication strategy to ensure that the Ombuds Office is well known and easily accessible, including the creation of centralized contact mechanisms. So our Ombuds Office is our centralized place where we take grievances and ensure accountability in the system. An activity that this activity would be developed to include action steps and timeline, and apologies for the edit that I need to make on this slide. But when we look at some example action steps for a sub-region, these could look like educating North King County community on the Ombuds Office and identifying the right stakeholders to convene and develop our strategy. We could deploy that strategy and then review and enhance across the following years. And so when we're looking then at how we want to be really moving forward, we put together as the sub-regional planning team some questions to our sub-regional partners on what do you want to see out of a North King County sub-regional plan. I'll circle back to this as there's one final topic I wanted to discuss tonight, but I wanted to share that these are questions that we would really keenly like your feedback on, as they'll be helpful and directive to us. So we're building something that truly is in service of North King County, and something that you all can fully benefit from and find value in moving us together. And I'll provide now a brief update on the North King County ILA. I realize this is the first time I've been back since the approval of the ILA and the full signing of it. So thank you again for stepping into partnership with us as the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. My brief updates here are largely administrative ones, as the first steps in putting together implementing the ILA has been exchanging tax documentation between cities and KCRHA, so getting everything stood up and in that way, and then getting agencies set up within the Flux grants management system, many of which were already set up, but being able to get everything lined up in our grants management system. 6 service providers are funded through the agreement, and we've been working with all of them, checking in to make sure everything is going smoothly and that we are setting up the contracts appropriately. Through this agreement, we also have new funding. So there was an additional amount of funding that came through from the partners at the City of Lake Forest Park. And so there is additional funding now to be able to implement increases to severe weather response for North King County. And some of that planning work is underway. And I believe the North King County Coalition on Homelessness will be taking up that conversation this month. And with that, I'm fearful that I've talked way too much and covered a lot of topics. And so I will be pausing here and more than happy to take any questions you all have. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Any questions? Councilmember File.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor O'Kane. In looking at some of the questions you brought to us today on, what partners should be considered for, providing input, it would be really nice to see, of course, our King County Housing Authority, ARC of King County. I think giving the broad scope of experience and outreach they have with Pocket Community is really important. And their direct contact and resource list would be very helpful. I can see groups such as the North Shore Senior Center and North Shore School District being able to be very helpful in those efforts as well. And for updates on that continuation for bringing us updates, I think it would be nice to have something every 6 months. And given this is a newer implementation.
Thank you so much, Council Member.
Any other questions? Seeing no further questions, any comments before we go? Councilmember Kugler.
Thank you so much for this update. You definitely covered a lot of information, and I will need some time to review it, I think, a little bit more and process some of it. But off the top of my head, also in terms of organizations that might be good to work with, of course, our city staff, we're in the process of hiring for a human services staff member, and and also NUSA. Hopefully you are also connected with them. Okay. I think those are some of the stakeholders that might be good to connect with if you're not already talking with them.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Any other comments? Councilmember File.
Thank you. Just a compliment. I just want to thank you for all of this amazing and great work. I know it's taken an amazing amount of time and consideration to pull together all the resources and the tools to just come to this point today. As you know, housing is a significant need all across our region and all in our state. Affordable housing, housing types at all levels is really what people need to be able to have access to housing in our state. So hopefully we can get there by working together. So thank you for all you've done.
Thank you so much, Councilmember.
Yes, I have to agree. The progress that you have made since 2020 in particular to today is incredible. So thank you for your detailed presentation. It's always very informative and helpful to us as a council. We are certainly looking forward to your next presentation in October. And it's always great to see you. And thank you, Garrett, as well, for being a part of this and your work on this incredibly important issue for the city of Kenmore. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
And now I think I can call back our mayor, Mayor Herbig.
Next on the agenda, Mr. City Manager, where's the fun?
All right, I know exactly where it is, or at least where it was. Last Saturday, we had the ribbon cutting for Tlahuatis Park. And as you know, it is one of the 5 walkways and waterways projects that was approved in the 2016 bond measure. And it is the 4th of the 5 ribbon cuttings that you have done. And it was a great turnout. And I want to thank Morita Colburn and Nicole Suarez for producing the event. And thank you, Mayor Herbig, for the great speech and just for representing the city so well, and for the city council members who were able to come. Just lots of smiles. You can see the crowd there, a portion of the crowd, most of the crowd there. And if you go to the next slide, not a great shot. And then the last slide is our Indigenous artist Ty Juvenile, who produced that spindle whirl and also the mural at the park. So it was great to have him there and honor him and the other artists and the contractors and designers, and of course the project manager, Maureen Kalaisi. So it was a fun event, and it was just super exciting to see how beautiful that park is and how well it's come together. It is a unique park. I heard somebody call it the jewel in the crown of Kenmore. And so we've just got one more walkways and waterways ribbon cutting to go. So it's exciting.
Yeah, that was a really good event. It was a lot of fun. Next on the agenda is public comments. We welcome our community members to the council's meeting. In this forum, the council does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the council is to listen. We will hear from our on-site guests first, followed by our virtual guests. If you're online, please use the raise hand feature now if you wish to speak. All guests must address comments to the mayor and city council. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we can confirm that we can hear you. Please state your name and city of residence for the record and keep your comments to the allotted time. We will not split your time with others or reset your time except by express approval of the presiding officer. Screen sharing is not allowed. You can submit materials to the council or clerk in advance. Please do not comment about pending development projects on which the council will make future decisions, as those are quasi-judicial matters, and council members must limit their communications about such matters. This meeting is being recorded. Thank you for taking the time to express your comments. Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 2 individuals signed up for on-site public comment, and we'll take them in this order. Carl Michaelman, followed by Elizabeth Mooney.
I'm Carl Michaelman. I reside in Briar, but I own property in Kenmore. And according to Karina File, I'm a non-resident, but I do pay taxes. So the reason I'm here today is because I want to talk about what the council precedes that they've done the past 2 years, the gun-ho of what they've done. So I even heard it right now from Karina File saying we need housing, low income, affordable. Fine, we're all good with that, okay? But here's the problem that I have. I'm gonna give you a little list. I don't have the date, the line time, but first let's talk about last year. Took a vote to increase taxes. You said no. That would have been 50,000 in revenue. But then you took a vote and decided to do 3% to COLA for staff. That was over $100,000 of revenue. Then you put in tenant rights because we're all worried about the tenant rights. Then you just kind of turned around and went ahead and started increasing their cable and a few other things. That was last year. Then we come back to sometime this year. You vote for a 6% COLA for staff. And I'm quoting Melanie O'Kane. Well, if the Port of Seattle did it, we should do it. However, here's the problem. We're not the Port of Seattle and we don't have the money for Seattle. Then what happens is you decide to do a tax increase, 1.9. I'm okay with that. I'm a 10th ahead of the taxes, 10th ahead, because you didn't do it last year. Thank you. But then we turn around, you put a garbage tax on the people that can't afford it. You do a PSE 2% on an increase, and then you double the card tabs. You guys are talking, I don't know. Tell me how you're trying to help the people with low income, affordable housing, and all these people are using these services. It makes no sense. Okay, and then what's happening is the council's not transparent. We got 5 people or 4 people that work for municipalities. Nigel, you should have been just sitting here because you heard everything your company did. And then to top it all off, we had a send off for the legislators. Here, write your question down. Write it down. Nigel's there picking out the questions of what questions he likes that are going to be answered instead of taking it out and putting it in a hat. And then the questions come on. Everybody wants a piece of the pie, whether it's county, city, state. We just voted for a crisis center. Bingo, tax. You guys are really got to figure out how you're going to do this. I understand that, but you're going to have to figure this out, folks. You can't keep taxing us. It makes no sense. Time for a new.
Your time is up, Mr. Michaelman. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Have a good day.
Elizabeth Mooney.
Can you give that to the clerk, please?
I'll take that from you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Elizabeth Mooney, resident of Kenmore since '95, president of nonprofit PERC that's been around for over 20 years. I have an update for the council, just gave, and for the community regarding the asphalt facility on the Cal Portland land. It's owned by Cadman, also known as Heidelberg Materials. Thank you, city, for hiring consultants to dig into the concerns that citizens raised regarding what we felt were very unhealthy emissions from the asphalt plant for years, for probably a decade since I've been smelling it. And my friend Kate has been tasting it on her clothes, in her hair. Thanks to our collaborative efforts with citizens, lawmakers, nonprofits, high school clubs, agencies, especially Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, Cadman was required to test its emissions finally, including VOCs, January 2023. Thankfully, the Pollution Control Hearings Board did not let them off the hook for the required testing in January. What I have here for you to see is that our fears were justified, in my opinion, and you can judge based on the data in this one page of an over 200-page report. You will see Montrose Air Quality Services, Table 1-2, Summary of Average Compliance Results. Cadman Kenmore Plant Exhaust reveals over emission limits in filtered particulate matter, total particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, and total volatile organic compounds. Those are not good for our health. So when we biked, walked, sat in the town square in these emissions and felt sick and concerned for our health, it seemed we had a cause, and maybe now we're vindicated. Cadman is idle now. What's that mean? And we want your help, council, in understanding this air quality issue and your help in spreading the word all around our ecosystem of North Lake Washington, that thanks to a concerned citizen request, we have this data now. In addition to citizens requesting this, should our city perhaps task our consultants to inform us of these emission updates that surpass emission limits and let our community know it was and is primarily due to citizen comments, citizen public disclosure requests, citizens' attendance at Puget Sound Clean Air Agency meetings, that we are unveiling the truth with you now. It appears this asphalt facility was not upholding our desire for a healthy environment that we want now, environmental justice. What will council policy do now that you know this information? And really, thank you, city, for doing it. They were not a good neighbor. They're idle now. What does it mean? Are they waiting to see what our city will do when our citizens are fully informed and our counsel of the truth? How will you protect our public health and safety council from
Thank
this
you. Your
day
time
on?
is up.
Thanks.
Mayor, I have no additional on-site public comments signed up. Can we move on to virtual?
Yes.
If you're virtual and like to give public comment at this time, please use the raise hand function. We currently have 3 individuals with their hands raised for virtual public comment, and we'll take them in this order. Vicki Grayland, followed by Stacy Valenzuela, and then David Morton. Vicki, go ahead. Vicki, you are still muted.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I want to say I support my other 2 fellow Kenmore citizens, especially Elizabeth Mooney. And I have 2 things I want to talk about tonight: the personnel manual and the land acknowledgement. Should I save the personnel manual for later? Or is this a good time?
This is the only time, we're having a public hearing on the transportation improvement program, but this would be the time to address that.
All right, thank you. Thanks for answering. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. On behalf of the citizens of Kenmore, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. I do not have a transcript of what the DEI committee chair said as the rewritten land acknowledgement 2 weeks ago. But I'm relying on my memory that she did not mention the Duwamish tribe, but she mentioned the Muckleshoot and several other individual tribes. It's kind of a sensitive subject. The Muckleshoot have been doing a print and media criticism of the Duwamish tribe for about 2 years now. I do not understand it. No one I've asked about it understands it, but I think it's important for us to stay away from it and to just use the term Coast Salish peoples and not go into individual tribes. I think it's important that the DEI committee know that and understand it. And for the personnel manual, I'd like to point out in attachment number 2 that it says that this comparison was conducted by by several city maintenance workers. That's really not going to stand in an NLRB hearing. I think you need some actual documents to document this. I'm sure those cities would be happy to give documents to King Rob.
Thank you. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Stacy Valenzuela, go ahead.
Stacy Valenzuela, Kenmore. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. My senior neighbors are coming to me concerned about how they will pay their rent, car insurance, car tabs, garbage, cable, PSC. Many are expecting to receive May and June car registrations. I thank you for getting the city contract reflected in the garbage bill, but there is no senior discount. Please advise, how do our neighbors apply for this senior, veteran, and low-income discounts? Please share with our manufactured homeowners details on the Growth Management Board appeal reversal. This is important. It would also help if we learn from past mistakes. There are 2 areas in the city that we know of continual flooding, and we want to know within the presentation tool for the culverts, is it easier to see when we have all the information, the creek name, the numbers, the comparison to the current flow to where the flow will be after these culverts are put in? As the residents, they care about our environment. We want complete and transparent information. We also request adding each Native American name, which the UW historian and author that I brought back to Kenmore does present on the original map of the streams with the Native names in Kenmore area by Native people. It would also help if the city took a new bill, nothing about me without me approach to all issues in Kenmore. We're still asking that residents be included in these decisions. Also, call me a whistleblower, a seeker of truth, guilty secret Kenmore love note committer. Due to the residents and the expertise of David Morton, we are almost in tears. Finally, testing has shown per the Montrose report that the residents' 17 years of concerns with the Heidelberg Cadmium asphalt plant emission shows it's not just steam. The other thing we need is signage. We need signage at the protected area wetlands. We also need the DEI person mentioning support of only federal recognized tribes. We need to make sure we are practicing inclusion, never excluding our Kenmore Native peoples. We should include with gratitude the Duwamish, Naquamish as part of the Coast Salish. I request, please reach out to the recognized professor in the field from UW whose expertise is assisting with land acknowledgement, specializing in each distinctive area and local Native First people for that land. I can share it with you. I think all these things are so important, and it's time for change in Kenmore. We've come so far in the last 3 or 4 years, but we can always do better. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
David Morton.
Good evening, council members. I'm David Morton. I live near Redmond. Environmentally conscious people in Kenmore have been saying for a long time that the emissions from the asphalt plant off Highway 522 are hazardous and toxic and cause illness. But past and present owners of the plant, along with Puget Sound Clean Air Agency and city consultants, have reassured the community that the asphalt plant's emissions are in compliance with the facility's permit. They have even claimed that the emissions are just steam. In reality, the emissions are not just steam. The EPA maintains a document called AP 42, which identifies and quantifies hazardous air pollution from various polluting industries in America. AP 42 shows that the emissions from hot mix asphalt facilities, like the one in Kenmore, contain a wide range of toxic, carcinogenic, and hazardous air pollutants. AP 42 shows that the emissions from Kenmore's asphalt plant are not just steam. Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, or PSCAA, is authorized to enforce the Clean Air Act in King, Snohomish, and 2 other counties, and they issue penalties to companies who violate the act. The EPA has identified 6 pollutants as criteria air pollutants and has set permissible levels for them. These 6 criteria air pollutants include carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter. The recent permit issued by PSCAA to the asphalt plant sets emission limits for these pollutants, plus volatile organic chemicals or VOCs. The permit says that the plant had to be tested for all these pollutants by January 2023. An air quality service called Montrose was hired by Lehigh Hanson to determine if the asphalt plant complies with its permits. The results are in. The plant failed to pass emission tests for particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, and VOCs. Cadman hired Trinity Consultants to review the report, and Trinity questions the accuracy of the report, pointing out challenges that may have affected the results, including catastrophic failure of the asphalt plant's own antiquated equipment. PSCAA is reviewing these test results. The lab hired by Heidelberg showed the plant's emissions are not just steam. If a catastrophic failure of the plant can occur during an important compliance testing of the facility, how can Kenmore residents be assured that even more catastrophic equipment failures will not occur during the routine operation of the plant? Thank you.
Mayor, I have no additional virtual public comments with their hands raised.
All right. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. The chair would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The consent agenda stands approved. Next up, we have a public hearing, proposed resolution number 23-397 for the 2024-2029 6-year transportation improvement program, presented by Engineering Director John Vicente.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Tonight I'll be talking about the 6-year transportation improvement program. Prior to doing our public hearing, I'll be going through my presentation, and then after that we can do the hearing, if that works for you. So again, tonight I'll be reviewing the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. I'll be reviewing what new projects are being added to the TIP. I will be giving you a summary of our 22 improvements as it relates to our complete streets policy. Then there'll be the public hearing and then a recommendation to adopt the resolution. As I've spoken many times in the past, the background behind the TIP, it is required by the RCW 35.77010. The TIP must show how we propose to utilize our transportation funds in the upcoming 6 years. The TIP needs to be consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. It needs to be updated each year. And this is a planning document, so it's not fiscally constrained. The TIP needs to be filed with the Washington State Department or Washington State Secretary of Transportation. A public hearing is required prior to approval, and the local funds noted in the TIP are based upon, are not restrained, and they are only, the local funds used can only be approved through the CIP through council. So from our previous TIP, there are 10 projects from 2023-2028 that I'm carrying over. Of those 10 projects, there have been some adjustments to 3 of them, and they're noted in red, the changes. 61st Avenue sidewalk replacement that was originally noted as sidewalk replacement from 181st to the northern city limits. But given our inability to get the funding for the southern portion moved up to a sooner date, I've had to break that into 2 phases. And so this particular phase is going to be the sidewalk replacement on the east side of the street from 192nd to the city limits, and then some changes at the 193rd and 193rd and 62nd Avenue intersection. The remaining work for the phase 2 was the replacement sidewalks on the west side and relocating the sidewalk south of 192nd away from the creek. And then the 80th Avenue ped bike sidewalk that was originally from 179th to 185th, but through our grant discussions, they asked us to do some changes near the 522 intersection. So that's what was added to the grant application. And then Northeast 181st, that was originally 61st to 62nd to terminate the sidewalk was going to terminate just west of the existing sidewalk that's between 62nd and 63rd. And I decided that we should probably just take that all the way to 63rd versus leaving that sidewalk ending mid-block. 7 projects were added to the tip. I've got them listed there. I will be going through those more specifically on the map. One thing that I do want to mention, and this is regarding the 84th Avenue or the sorry, they're not on there. They're on the next page, sorry. Then 3 projects were graduated: the West Smash River Bridge project, the 180 Drive ped bike project, 68th Avenue ped bike project. Those are graduated because we finished construction on those. Okay. Okay, so just going to kind of show you in general where the projects are located. The SR 522 West B project is located, of course, on SR 522 between 61st and the western edge of the city limits. Project number 2, this is the Northeast 170th interim sidewalk. This was added at the request of council. Northeast 192nd Street sidewalk, that is on the north side of 192nd from 73rd to 75th. The 84th Avenue Northeast ped bike project. This one was, I've got some news I unfortunately need to share with council, is that we were originally told that the 84th project was receiving grant funding on this next cycle. That was incorrect information that we were given, and unfortunately it is not being funded. I'm still keeping it in the tip because it's an important project and I intend to apply during the next grant cycle. It is our intention to work with our legislators to see if we can possibly get funding for that, but we've been told that it would be difficult. So, and then pavement preservation. We're looking to do an overlay on 61st Avenue along with the 61st sidewalk replacement project. So that would be 2025 period. And then the next location that we're thinking will need an overlay is 73rd Avenue north of 192nd, and that would come in 2027. The ADA transition program, that's a citywide program. We typically will look for locations that need the score highest within our ADA transition plan. And we're going to be using we're going to be improving ADA facilities as part of the 61st Sidewalk project. That's our first go at for attacking the transition program. And again, as I mentioned, the 61st Sidewalk program is north of 190th, north of 192nd or 190th on 61st Avenue. Then the Lower Swamp Creek Bridge, that's a replacement project. That one is currently unfunded, and I am currently seeking grant funds to get that replaced. And that's again 175th at 80th. Then we have the PED facilities program. This covers, I've mentioned to council before about all the projects that are in there, and this covers just about any project that we don't identify in the tip. It allows me to add them, or it allows me to apply for grants without having to go to council to get them into some sort of program. The projects that I believe will do well in the next grant cycle I've included in the tip. And those are 80th Avenue Northeast between 185th and 192nd, 192nd Street from 73rd to 80th, 84th Avenue from Simons to 155th, Northeast 155th from 80th to 87th, and then Simons Road 152nd, 88th. And I'll go into more detail on those a little bit later in the presentation. 80th Avenue Ped Bike Project, that is from SR 522 to approximately 185th Street. Arrowhead Drive sidewalks from on Arrowhead Drive from 151st to 64th. And then the 73rd Ped Bike, that is another project that we thought we were going to get funding for, and we were told that it is actually not going to get funding. And so this one will be, I will keep it in the tip because I think it still will score well if we go at another round it. So,
yeah, and John, can you go into a little bit further detail as to why we're not getting funding for these two projects, 73rd sidewalk and 84th Avenue sidewalk? It has to do with how WashDOT is using the money to fund older projects. Is that correct?
As I understand it, you've got two separate groups at the state. You've got the folks who come up with that write their what they want, and you have the folks that write up the language for the funding package. And from what I understand, there's a lack of communication. I don't say a lack of communication. There's information that wasn't provided to one side or the other, and a little bit of misunderstanding as to what the funding was actually for. And what we understand now is that the money that they approve includes appropriations from previous bienniums. It's a carryover essentially. So they're not approving funding just for the current year program. They're approving funding for this program plus all projects that have not completed and still require funding for this next budget. And that was the disconnect between the grant writers and everybody that thought we had funding, because it wasn't written in the funding package that included appropriations. It was just budget approval. Here's a set of projects. So.
What's frustrating is everybody we talked to understood otherwise. Including our legislators and our lobbyists, and they were all being told that our projects were being funded. So frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, and as we understand it, it's difficult for them to say how much they actually need in the new biennium from previous bienniums. We have a similar issue as well too. It takes us some time to figure out how much we actually need from the previous biennium to be brought over to the new biennium, and that's kind of where the two did not cross very well. So unfortunately, we don't have the funding for those two projects. But again, the 84th Ped Bike was within the state's contingency plan. And what they told me is if projects come under budget or if people don't need the money, there is still a chance it could be funded, though that's extremely rare. Arrowhead's been on the contingency list in the last 8 grant cycles, I think. So again, I think it'll score well, and it has scored well with this last cycle. And we were just barely on the line. 73rd was the first one after the contingency list. So with roughly the same amount of funding available the next biennium, I think we'll stand a good chance of getting those projects funded. So new project, Northeast 192nd Street project. This is funded through the Safe Routes to Schools program. Currently, we've got sidewalks at these locations, the dashed pink line. The new project is going to add about 380 linear feet of sidewalk that's going to close the gap on 192nd and close the gap on 75th to get a better continuous connectivity. This project will also add a school flasher where the sidewalk ends and the new one begins. The 80th Avenue Ped Bike project, this is funded through the Pedestrian Bicycle Program. that goes from SR 522 to Northeast 185th. This is where we currently have sidewalks and currently have bike lanes from SR 522 to about 177th. This project will add 1,775 linear feet of sidewalk on both sides of the street, making a full connection between SR 522 and Northeast 185th on both sides. This project will add 3,600 linear feet of bike lanes up to 185th and connecting to the existing bike lanes at 179th or 177th. We're going to be adding 3 rectangular rapid flashing beacons at 182nd, 177th, and 179th. And we're going to be doing some curb ramp upgrades and some reductions in crossings and radius reductions at 182nd, 183rd, 184th, 179th, pretty much the main intersections along that corridor. And then where we're putting in the flashers, we're going to be doing some additional pedestrian lighting at that location. And then also as part of this grant, we're going to be doing an evaluation of the connection with the Burke-Gilman Trail. We're looking at possible bike boxes and some green bike crossing to the trail, and also looking to see if we can make some modifications to the connection to the trail. If you've been out there and looked at it, it's just an itty bitty little curb ramp. So we're looking to make some improvements there to make it easier for bicyclists. It's a complicated situation because it opens right onto the trail. So we need to look at how we could possibly make that connection work with it and make it safe at the same time. The other project we have, Arrowhead Drive sidewalk, that is funded through the Safe Routes to Schools program. It goes from 151st down by Arrowhead all the way around to 64th Avenue. This is where we currently have sidewalks around the school itself, connecting to Juanita Drive. This new project will add 1,125 feet of sidewalk along the west and south side of Arrowhead Drive. We'll be adding 3 school zone flashers, 2 at 64th Avenue and 1 as you approach elementary school from Juanita Drive. We'll be adding 1 RRFB at 64th Avenue Northeast, along with some lighting. We'll be doing a curb reduction, radius reduction at 154th, make it a shorter crossing. And then this project is going to be adding some traffic calming. We're not certain quite yet what that is going to take. We're going to be looking at possibly chicanes, speed humps, whatever was within our traffic calming program. And we will be most likely doing a little pilot ahead of time to see how it works. And we'll be talking more about that next week about traffic calming program and piloting. The next project, now this one is unfunded. Again, this is the 84th Ped Bike program that was supposed to be funded through the Safe Routes to Schools program. But again, I want to keep it in the tip because I still think it's an excellent project that will score well with the next grant funding cycle. And that one again is 150th to 155th. This is where we have existing sidewalks at that location. This project would add sidewalks on both sides of the street. It would also add 2,600 linear feet of bike lanes within that area. We're looking at 1 RRFB at 153rd. And then we're looking at curb ramp upgrades and curb bulbs, reduction of curbing at the 4 intersections that connect with this with 80th at this location. And then we're doing intersection lighting at the RRFB and then looking at possible intersection lighting at 150th Place. Yes.
Just a quick question here. I like, adding the RFB and I like everything else I'm seeing here. My question though is for kids who are walking to school, does a crossing at 153rd make more sense than say a crossing 1 block south that leads more directly into the school?
So I kept it to the intersections because that's where likely the majority of kids would be coming from.
I'm
There's-
talking just, one block south of that, right where it says 84th.
Oh, there's
I
already
think
one.
I think that's the driveway into, there's one there.
There's already one there. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you.
Oh, yeah, caught that already.
Councilor File?
Is there anything we do to kind of improve, flashing signage for the crosswalks in on this area on 184th with a higher amount of pedestrian travel? I think that's an important thing to our communities that both visit the school, attend the school, and the families along with the park that's nearby. It just seems like there needs to be a little bit more improvement in this area just for the safety purposes. Anything we can do to enhance greater awareness to pedestrians and where they're at in travel is good in preventing, collisions. So, I want to save lives as best as possible here.
And that's the general desire with all of these projects.
Yes.
We kind of look at the basic box so that we can score well and make an indication that we're looking at this. But as we go through design, we look more closely at the corridor. When we do these applications, we're so high up elevation wise and a planning level, 0% design, we don't see the specifics that are necessary. But once we get in design, we start looking at, maybe this corridor needs more, maybe it needs less, maybe this feature should go down here, up there. So no, I definitely hear what you're saying. And that is something that we do look at once we actually begin the design of a project. So.
Thank you.
Councilor Sharpnick?
So this is just sort of a follow-up to something that you said. You talked about the potential for it being funded in a future grant cycle. Can you say a little bit more about, is that just next year, same time? And if so, when would the build happen if it were funded? And just sort of lay that out a little, because I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the project that we had a lot of citizen input around. Yeah, okay.
Yes. So the next call for grants within the pedestrian, bicycle, and the Safe Routes to Schools would be next year, next spring. I would definitely apply for both of those project programs. If those were awarded, it would be 2 years out from what I originally proposed, which would be 2027 at this point, 2028, depending upon what kind of projects we have and how long, or I should say, how much work that we have with our staff. We could apply for some federal funds. There are a couple that are out there that we just are not competitive for. There are others that there is some competition for, but we would need to do a little bit more work to actually apply for those funds, which we don't have a lot of data yet.
And Safe Routes doesn't apply here, or we?
So Safe Routes to School is the state funded program that comes out next year.
Okay, that is the one you'd apply for.
Yes.
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
Okay,
those
thank
two.
you.
Yeah, there are other funds. There's that we normally go for. There's the Surface Transportation Program. That's usually for projects that are around multiple commercial centers, which we don't really qualify much for that. There is the Safe Streets for All, I believe. I forget the name of that one. That one requires a bit more information than we currently have. We need to look more deeply at that grant to see how reasonable it would be for us to expect to get funding from that. There's a lot of, just like all of these grants, they list a certain things that, okay, you have to have this, you have to have this, you have to have this. And if you have this, then you get points. If you have this, then you get points. And with much like the Surface Transportation Program funds, we don't check off a lot of boxes on a lot of the federal funds that are out there, because they tend to have a lot of things in there that just, we don't meet with some of our projects. But again, digging in deeper and looking to see if we can figure it out. They're very complicated and convoluted. Just the programs themselves are very difficult to figure out. And then the applications are extremely complicated. And then the process for review and award of those grants is long. So.
Councilmember File.
Thank you. You know, I want to support Mr. John Vicente on his comments just now. I know there's a new batch of federal funding grants that newly came available, yet they're so complicated for smaller cities and medium-sized cities to get through, and even not enough staff. That National League of Cities has put together a onboarding webinar to help with smaller cities like ours be able to understand what it is that is needed in these new determinations, let alone new language that they're asking for, and new information that they've not asked for in the past. And so I hope that we participate in that, or the city does, in the next couple of weeks, and that we get registered for that infrastructure webinar. But we'll see. I do support any avenue we can to try to improve upon our infrastructure for our community. We are a younger city, you know, after being unincorporated for years, being incorporated, and we definitely have, you know, the have and have not community. Until we can bring our community together to have greater accessibility, it's a lot of, you know, lining things up. And I hope to have greater connection for our community. So I wholeheartedly support anything we can do to support your an execution of applying for additional grants or funding to meet our goals.
Councilmember Kugler.
I think I'm feeling a little, sad following our last meeting and how excited we were about all the funding. And I'm assuming like staff probably just found this out within days of.
A couple hours ago.
Oh,
Found out
wow.
today.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why the presentation hasn't changed much. I managed to get 2 words, unfunded.
Okay, so I did want to clarify. So in the attachment, the proposed resolution, like where there is actual funding, I think listed from federal and state, that's not reflective of this new information. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Baker.
Yes, since you mentioned the word, there seems to be a lot of unfunded and spots in this tip. While I am completely supportive of the tip, I'm just concerned about the total amount of unfunded. How much is that?
The total amount of unfunded shown in the tip?
Yeah.
I'd have to do the math on that.
Unsecured, let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's unsecured. There's a lot. You know, my guess is probably somewhere in the mark of $10 million.
So what plan do we have to get these funded?
Apply for grants, just like I did last year. Just keep applying and applying. I typically apply for, depending on the projects, I like to apply for 5 to 10 projects because there's I usually expect I'm going to get 1 or 2 projects. 3 was surprising. And when they said 4 or 5, I'm like, really? But yeah, I usually expect to get probably about 2. On average, we get 1 to 2 on these grant cycles. And so what I do is I like to put the projects that I'm thinking about proposing, so you as council are aware of what I'm going after next. Now, what I would wind up doing is still going through our pedestrian facilities plan, looking at the grants and going, okay, which project fits best with that particular grant? But based off of the grants that I'm currently aware of, the projects that I list in the tip are the ones that I think we would do best at getting funding for. And so I present them to you as unfunded projects so that you can have a chance to comment, know more about that, and also to let the public aware that this is kind of the direction that I'm proposing that we go in.
Yeah, you've been very successful in writing grants, and there's no doubt in my mind that you're going to come up with most of these funds. And like you say, if you do it a couple at a time, I mean, that's really the way you do it. Because I know that my time on the council, we've always had unfunded portions or unsecured portions. So I congratulate you for what you've managed to accomplish so far with funding a lot of these projects. And I know you will continue to do that. So thank you.
And we did mention all of the programs that actually got grant funding that we
Yeah.
received. We just mentioned those 3 that we just recently received, but we had more earlier this year, and we're expecting from Sound Transit later this year as well too. Right. So again, 73rd Avenue Ped Bike, which was supposed to be through the Ped Bicycle program. And if I reapply, I would likely go for that program and the Safe Routes to Schools, or for that one, they both meet the criteria. This was 192nd to 201st. And the main reason for the cutoff of 201st is there's existing sidewalk there at that location. So this is where we have existing sidewalk within that particular corridor. And then this is where we're going to be putting bike lanes in as part of the 2023 overlay project, which should be done by the end of the summer. This project was going to install 1,820 linear feet of sidewalk along the east side of the road to close the 2 gaps that exist in the sidewalk. And then it would add 5,028 linear feet of bike lanes from end to end. Project would also include one RRFB right there near the connection into Wall Swamp Creek, that pedestrian trail that exists there. That's where the connection was proposed. And then pedestrian lighting at that location. And then a reduction of crossing at 201st Place. And then Northeast 170th interim.
Before we move on, John, sorry.
Oh,
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just a quick question, going back to the 73rd project. And you said it earlier in a conversation, and you said it again tonight. So the piece that you were planning to do this summer, is that the striping, is that still happening, or that was assuming this funding?
No, so the striping, the restriping we're doing, the bike lanes,
Yeah.
and sidewalk repair, that is south of 192nd, and
Yeah.
that's currently under construction right now.
Okay, so that's
Yes.
still happening.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank
And
you.
that incidentally is one project that I managed to get us about $900,000 in grant funds for. So I got that last year,
Beautiful.
so.
Thank you.
So the Northeast 170th Street interim sidewalk, this was at council's request for staff to look at potentially funding some sort of interim improvement between 72nd and Rhododendron Park. This is where we currently have sidewalk within that area, and this project would add the sidewalk within that gap. As mentioned in my previous discussions with council, this interim project would be a 4-foot wide sidewalk. There would be no buffer. And at this time, we're not looking at making changes to the driveway approaches. Depending upon how much funding that we can muster up for this will depend upon whether or not we can tackle those driveways. But our goal right now is to at least put concrete down where it's dirt. So, but again, it just depends on the funding we can have, as this is not originally programmed, and we're finding funding for these other grant projects. The 84th Avenue Ped Bike. This is a project from Simons Road to 155th. This is where we currently have sidewalks. Ignore that dashed line on the right side of 84th Avenue because that's not going in. But we do have sidewalks in the other locations as shown. And of course, the bike lanes aren't going in. That's proposed for the other 84th project. This project would add 1,600 linear feet sidewalk, likely on the west side of the street, as that is where the majority of the houses and connections exist at this time. This would add 3,200 linear feet of bike lanes on both sides of the street. This project would also add one RRFB at Northeast 158th Street. And then intersection lighting at that crossing. And then we would be doing a reduction of crossing there at 84th and Simons Road, that desert of concrete and asphalt would be shrunk much like what we did on the north side of the intersection. And again, on this particular one, this was a quick look-see. I haven't delved too deep into it. Once I actually put together a grant application, I may be looking at another RFB at that other intersection just south of Simons Road. Not positive yet, so. The Northeast 155th Street sidewalks from 84th to 87th. This is where we currently have sidewalks or proposed sidewalk on the darn east side of 84th, just south of 155th. This project would add sidewalks on the north and south. Sorry, there's bike lanes that are proposed at that location there. This project would add 780 linear feet of sidewalk on the north and south side of the street, closing the gap. And if there is room, I'd like to add bike lanes to connect to the bike lanes on Simons, which would also connect to future bike lanes on 84th. 80th Avenue ped bike project from 185th to 192nd. This would be a continuation of the project we currently are getting funding for from 522 to 185th. So where we currently have sidewalks, not too many places. They're at 190th and just north of 185th. There's little pocket sidewalks at those two locations. This project would add, oh, I'm sorry, there's also the bike lanes going in down there south of 185th for the 80th Avenue project we have funded. This project would add 3,470 lineal feet. I'm currently proposing it on both sides of the street. But based off of the total cost of this project, it's a little bit high to get a good funding. So I may have to look at just building on one side of the street, likely the west side. But again, this project can be split into two separate projects without any problems. This would add 3,580 lineal feet of bike lanes, regardless of whether we do sidewalks on both sides of the street. This would add two RFBs, one at 185th and one at 190th. We would also have pedestrian lighting at those two locations. And then we would be doing some curb reduction, a curb bulb, reduced curb radii at the 190th intersection. And then as part of this project, we would be doing an intersection evaluation at 192nd. We're starting to see some congestion at that location, and our projections are showing that it's going to increase. And so we're going to be doing an analysis to see if we need to make changes to that intersection, such as a signal or a roundabout or something more than just the three-way stop. Don't really know what that is. That's why we're going to do an evaluation and see if we can incorporate that into this project, if it's simple, or if we have to create a different project. So I just want to get the grant to pay for it.
Quick question here, John. I was waiting to see where you're going to put RFBs, and I actually am a little confused as to why there wouldn't be one at 192nd. That's a major kind of east-west connector. So a lot of neighborhoods, if somebody's going to walk from, you know, anywhere else, they're going to come over that way, and it leads directly into Twin Springs. It seems to me like a fairly logical place to put a crossing. I mean, that's where I cross the street when I'm walking over to go check out, you know, where I would cross the street if I was going to Twin Springs. Any thoughts on that?
That would fall into the intersection evaluation. If we do an evaluation and we determine that we need to put a signal there, that would override an RFB. If we decide to do a roundabout there, then maybe that would be part of that. If we decide that we don't need anything at this time, it can wait, maybe we would put something there. It's a three-way stop, so cars are already stopping at that location. So, you know, it is important to have as much protection as you can. Again, we would have to evaluate that to see what we actually would want to do there.
Okay, thanks.
So it is a three-way stop sign intersection, right?
Correct.
So far, our policy has not been to put our RFBs where there is already a stop control. We've only been putting them on areas where there's no mainline stop control.
That's correct.
Well, then I might suggest, as you're looking at how to address the intersection, if we're not going to, if we decide we don't need to do anything, then at a minimum, I might suggest at least some marks, crosswalks, so the drivers are expecting that with better lighting. Not the lighting there is currently bad, but if we're going to put in a crosswalk, then I think we want to make it even more obvious for drivers.
And again, that's what this grant would do. We would evaluate that intersection because it's a little convoluted.
Sounds good.
So the other project on there is Northeast 192nd ped bike from 73rd to 80th. This is where we currently have sidewalk and proposed sidewalk with the other 192nd grant. This project, and we'd have the proposed bike lanes. This project would add 3,190 linear feet of sidewalk covering the south side of 192nd, and then continuing on the north side with the sidewalk ends to the 80th Avenue. This would add 4,452 linear feet of bike lanes on both sides of the street. And then we would again, I put the intersection analysis in there in case this one got funding and 80th didn't, so that I'm covering it on both grants since they tied with each other. And I do want to mention that this project elevated a little bit higher in my analysis, since we decided we didn't want to have the toll trail go through Swamp Creek, that this is now a major connection point for our bike facilities and a pedestrian facility. So I wanted to make sure that we were having a complete full system, plus it connects 80th with 73rd.
Councilor Baker?
Yeah, I was just curious, 192nd, that's a pretty narrow street already. How are you going to fit bike lanes in?
So it's technically not narrow. There's sufficient right of way to put all that in there. It's your typical 60-foot right of way. And the only place that might be a little tight would be at the culvert, but I believe there's enough room to get the sidewalk and bike lane through there.
On both sides?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that makes it look like it's narrow is there are encroachments and there's elevation differences, but there actually is enough right of way there.
Okay, so you're gonna be taking right away from the properties along the streets.
No, we'll be reclaiming right of way.
Yes,
So
that's a better way to phrase it.
All right, so as a summary, 22 advances towards our complete streets policy within our code. I'm supposed to let you know how much that we've done in advancing our policy. So last year, with the completion of Juanita Drive ped bike, 68 ped bike, and the West Sammamish River Bridge project, we installed 18,942 lineal feet of sidewalk, 31,560 lineal feet of bike lanes, and we put in one brand new RFB. There's several RFBs along the corridor, but they were existing and they were either relocated or refurbished. So I only counted the one as a new one. So a lot of work. So any other questions, comments before we go to the public hearing?
Councilmember Marshall.
It's a distinct pleasure to see families enjoying the new sidewalks on 68th, driving by there. It's an absolutely wonderful thing. Thank you.
Councilor File.
I just also wanted to thank you. It's amazing to see the amount of increased foot traffic by families and community using 68th and 190 Drive. It's a beautiful thing. So I'm thrilled to see our community enjoying the work that is done and provided through your department and together with the council's action. It's truly lovely. And I just want to applaud you and your work you've done. It is great. I really think that we need to applaud this work because we've installed a lot of sidewalks and we've really done huge movement to improve health outcomes for our community, to reduce road hazards, to improve our zero a Target Zero initiative by reducing speed traffic and installing 2 new school zones. So that's a lot that we should be, happy about. And thank you for your support in that work.
Any other comments or questions, Councilmember Shrupnick?
If I'm reading this correctly, it's something like 50,000 feet, right? Last year, something
So
like that,
with
18 and 31.
yeah, 18 for sidewalks and
Right.
31 for bike, and the bike
So
lanes are
just-
each direction.
Yeah, so I just want to underscore that's about 9.5 miles worth. Very nice.
And one thing I did not mention there, because it's not part of the complete streets, but we did do some really good environmental enhancements, especially with the bridge project. We removed, I think, 60 or 70 creosote piers from the old bridge that existed there and took out 2 concrete piers that were in there, and we reduced it to 2. We did a lot of mitigation work at Rhododendron Park and next to the boat launch. Did a lot of cleanup underneath the bridge. So we really cleaned up that area really nicely. So that's something that I don't think most people realize because they don't see it because it was all underwater. And but yeah, I just wanted to mention that that's another great achievement that we had with that project.
Deputy Mayor?
I just want to thank you for bringing that up. I drove through there the other day. It's amazing between the boat launch and Rhododendron Park to use the boat launch for my stand-up paddleboard the other day. It was just great. But calling attention to the environmental improvements that are taking place as we're doing this work is really important for our community to hear. So I genuinely appreciate you drawing attention to that while we're talking about this important work of safe pedestrian walkways and bike ped, excuse me. It's amazing. So thank you for this tremendous work, this detailed presentation. Since I am speaking, it's that 84th funding sure is a bit of a heartbreak today. We're going to find a way to get that done, hopefully sooner than, we'll find something, hopefully. So thank you for your work on that though, and getting the news to us timely.
Yeah, if you would have shown me a map or shown me an aerial or some of the streets that we have now compared to when I moved here 16-ish years ago, I'm not sure if I would have believed you. The investments that the council has made, that the city has made, that the taxpayers have made with walkways and waterways and with a lot of the other work we've done is just transformative. And looking through the map of projects you have on the tip, even knowing that some of them are unfunded, but also knowing that you're very good at chasing down those funds. It's literally night and day from where the city was, even just a decade ago. And, I want to echo what my colleague said about, just seeing people out there using the facilities. I remember before I was on council, I was at a council meeting, and I remember Mayor Baker at the time talking about how people said, well, why would you build sidewalks on 522? Nobody is going to walk. Nobody walks on both ways. It's like, well, yeah, it's a highway with no sidewalks. Of course, nobody's walking on it. But if you build it, people will use it. And I know it's a lot of work and we still have a lot of work to do, but we are slowly breaking ourselves out of the mold that we were in of you need a car to get anywhere. And it's going to take a lot more work. It's going to take another decade or two probably of hard work and focus. But at the end of the day, for our community, it's going to lead to a place where kids can safely walk to school, or more correctly, kids can walk to school with their parents, not worrying about them. There's a difference there. And where our seniors can safely walk to the drugstore or to the grocery store, and where all of us can get out and stretch our legs in a way that and see the city without having to get in our car. So I really appreciate all these investments, and also with the bike investments we're talking about here, with the rise of electric bikes, I think those are going to pay off in a way that we couldn't have imagined just a few years ago. So I want to thank you, John, for all the work you're doing and the work you'll continue to do. And Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you. Yeah, apologies. How many creosote pilings removed from the bridge project?
I want to say 40 or 50 of them. There were a lot in the water because they were actually in the river and then they were underneath the bridge in the muck area, I'll call it. But yeah, if you went down there, you could see them all because when they had the old bridge, they just cut them off and left it. And they've been in there for probably 100 years because I think that bridge was built in 1919, that first one. So yeah, they've been there a long time and they actually were able to remove them. We were fearful that they would just crumble and fall apart, but no, they came right out. So.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
This is a follow-up to something the mayor just said, in all your spare time, I'm sure, but it would be a fun presentation maybe next year to almost show like a time lapse, you know, or have it on the website. Like when we incorporated, here's the map of the sidewalks, you know, 5 years later, it looked like this, 10 years later, you know, we're coming up to 25th anniversary. So, you know, 5 slides of how we've really built out the sidewalks and bike facilities. I don't know. That's my little fantasy of communications there. Thanks.
Councilmember File.
Thank you. I just have one last question, and it might be something you can answer today or maybe bring back to us another time. But along 522 and Burke-Gilman Trail, there's a lack of lighting between 73rd and 80th. Is 81st anyway. There's a lack of lighting in that corridor. It seems like there's some on one side of the street and a lack of the street lighting on one side. So it under illuminates the Burke-Gilman Trail path. And so I'm hoping that we have a little bit of feedback on that, or we can maybe pass along a request for maintenance, because we have a lot of community who enjoy walking in the evenings or in early morning hours, let alone commuter travel time. And having that safety of illuminated routes is really important to our community. So thank you.
To address your question, given that it is the Burke-Gilman Trail, it falls under the purview of King County Parks. The space between starting at the curb south, that's all King County Parks. So if any light were to be installed, it would be on park property and they would be the ones that would have to do it. We can definitely make requests to them to look at the lighting and improve it on the trail, but it would fall to King County Parks to do that.
And more specifically to the point is on 522. That lighting on 522 does illuminate the path. There's a lack of lighting currently on 522 between those two major cross streets. And I don't know if it was related to the work recently done or work yet to be done or upgrades that need to be done. The lights are out.
Oh, they're
out.
They're out. Oh.
Yes, thank you.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none, that's what I was gonna do. Seeing none, I would like to open the public hearing for proposed resolution 23-397. Clerk, has anybody signed up for the public hearing?
We have no one signed up for on-site public comment for the public hearing. We do have individuals virtually. Can we move to virtual?
Yeah.
Great. If you are virtual and like to give public testimony during this public hearing, please use the raise hand function now. I have 2 individuals currently with their hands raised. Give me one moment to promote them. We'll take them in this order. We'll go with Stacy Valenzuela, followed by Vicki Grayland. Stacy, go ahead.
Stacy Valenzuela, Kenmore. You can hear me, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Feedback from residents suggests that we need a second opinion, maybe a third. It would be great to include residents and businesses, some that come from the neighborhoods or schools affected. Also, will these tip updates go before the Planning Commission? I thought we already had a public comments to strongly protect the lower Swamp Creek Bridge. Heard several residents requesting, and they will appreciate the additional markings and lights at the school area zones. However, the residents need to be included with transparency and public input on design phase. Each of the previous so-called improvements have had knowledgeable feedback that would have benefited the city if our residents were included before implementing the construction of projects, including some school bus zones, unsafe intersections, unsafe roadways. We need change to improve. Again, let's practice nothing about me without me so that our residents have a say in these changes. Thank you very much.
Vicky Grayland, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I wondered if this is about the personnel manual?
No, this is the transportation improvement plan.
Oh, sorry, I just.
Talk about the personnel manual would have been at the, during regular public comment.
Oh, okay, thanks. I have no comment then.
Mayor, I have no more individuals with their hands raised for this public hearing.
Is there anybody else wishing to be heard? Anybody else wishing to be heard? Anybody else wishing to be heard? All right, with that, the public hearing is closed. Moving on to the business agenda. Item A, proposed resolution number 23-397 for the 2024-2029 six-year transportation improvement program. Mr. Vicente. Anything further?
I don't have anything further. I believe I've given everything I can think of.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. Councilor File.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In response to some of the comment we heard tonight, we've had community meetings and engagement on our transportation infrastructure with citizen input. I know that there is communication between North Shore School District and bus transportation and WatchDOT. And so while those elements were not presented tonight, they are part of the work that's done that has brought us to this point today and what we're considering today. So I just wanted to clarify that for our community watching and listening at home.
Any further comments? Questions? Seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion to approve resolution number 23-397.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please take the roll?
On the motion to approve resolution number 23-397, seconded by Councilmember Baker. Councilmember File.
Yes.
Councilmember Baker.
Aye.
Councilmember Kugler.
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Kane.
Yes.
Mayor Herbig.
Yes.
With 7 yeses and 0 nos, the motion passes.
We have one item left on the business, study session, and I suspect it may go a little long. So I was wondering if unless there's any objection, we would take a 10-minute break. Okay, seeing no objection, we are at ease until 8:57.
Yes, sir.
say every year. Yeah, we should. Say that at every game.
Yeah, I'm the last one on my side.
Kenmore City Council will come back from recess. Study session agenda, personnel policies manual comprehensive update, presented by City Manager Rob Carlindsey and Attorney Kathy Weber. City Manager.
Thank you, Your Honor, members of the City Council. We're here to talk to you tonight about the Personnel Policies Manual, and it's been a long time coming, and it's been probably a year-long project that we've been working on. And I'd like to introduce to you Kathy Weber to my right. She's our personnel law attorney with Inslee Best, and she's been our go-to attorney on personnel issues for many years, as long as I've been here and perhaps longer. Yeah. So she's been a great resource, and she's been a really strong resource during this personnel policy update. So the Personnel Policies Manual, why have it? Well, it is a super important document. It's vital to the internal workings of our organization, and it provides policies on employment practices, employee responsibilities, and employee pay and benefits. So the personnel policies has had periodic reviews over the years, mainly to stay current with changes in state law, federal law, case law, things like that. But we haven't seen a really comprehensive review of the personnel policies in quite some time. So it is important to give the Personnel Policies Manual a holistic look as our organization, laws, and the world around us change. Personnel policies is mainly administrative in nature, and most of the manual falls under the city manager's purview, but there are sections of it that do fall under the council's purview, mainly those having to do with compensation. And we like to group it all together in one document, and therefore the entire document needs city council approval. So our presentation is divided into two sections tonight. The first section is the legal changes that Kathy made to the document. After she's done, and you're free to ask questions as we go along. After her presentation, then I'll talk about some compensation related changes or proposed changes that we need your approval on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy. Do you want to look at this screen?
I'm not sure. Oh, I am on. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here. Rob was just telling me beforehand that I think this is the first time that we've met in person after 10+ years. And I do have to correct him. The personnel manual revisions, I think that Joanna and I began working on them in about 2018 before COVID hit. And so it is long overdue. It's been a really good exercise for the city in that anytime the reason for having a policy manual or doing a comprehensive overview of personnel policies is to make sure that the city's policies and practices are consistent with law, and to update the manual to reflect any changes in the law. Secondly, to update the manual to reflect actual policies and practices, whether that may not be reduced to writing. And then third, to clarify any ambiguities or confusion that might arise as policies are edited and changed over the course of long periods of time. And so that's what the focus of this particular exercise was, and it was very comprehensive. So to just really generally summarize, I'm sorry, Rob, I'm not, oh, right, okay, there, okay, there. Sorry. There we go. Okay, so from a legal perspective, there were several policy amendments that were updated to reflect legal changes. So the anti-harassment laws, for example, were updated to include all of the recognized protected classes, which have changed over the years. The disabilities accommodations provision was added to the handbook. This is an example of something that has existed in practice. The city has been accommodating disabled employees since its inception, but its policy and practice had not been reduced to writing. And so this was a new section that was added to give the employees a better understanding in terms of the accommodation process. And then sections 1.8 relating to pregnancy and breastfeeding accommodations. That's an example of a new policy that is the product of recent statutory enactments. So those were some examples of legal updates. Religious accommodation, same as with disability accommodation, the city has in practice recognized religious diversities and accommodated it. The need for religious accommodation has not been one that has been in the forefront for the city, but a new section to reiterate and confirm the city's commitment to accommodating those who may have a religious or a need for a religious accommodation in the workplace. Section 6.3 relating to sick leave. This was a big one. As I'm sure you're already all familiar, the legislature a couple of years ago implemented a new mandate with respect to offering employees sick leave. And so we took a pretty extensive look at the city's sick leave policies in terms of how do we marry the city's practices, existing practices, which are far more generous than those that are required by state law, but making it consistent with the mandates of state law. So that was quite a bit of discussion and work. Section 6.6 to 6.8. This was just an exercise in coordinating the various leave laws, which can be confusing because they sometimes overlap and they sometimes don't. So just trying to better reduce to writing when one leave policy might apply and how they might relate to one another. Section 6.7 was an addition to reflect, again, Washington state law with respect to pregnancy disability leave. Oh, thanks. Okay. It worked for me. Section 6.15, this was a revision to reflect that this, again, state law that requires unpaid religious holidays for public employees. Section 6.17, again, with respect to domestic violence leave, this is a product of state law. Section 8.12 is an example of revamping the city's existing policy to not only reflect changes in the law, and in this case, it was federal law in terms of new clearinghouse and reporting requirements with respect to commercial driver's licenses, but also just updating to reflect the potential or the possibility of accommodation for employees who are seeking treatment for substance abuse. And so again, just updating, revamping, refreshing to reflect not only changes in the law, but to educate employees in terms of the city's policies. So section 8.13, I just touched upon that. There have been changes in federal law with respect to commercial driver's licenses and maintaining data and reporting to a federal database and with respect to drug and alcohol violations or citations. Section 8.15, this was one that I think that Rob was particularly excited about because it had the city's whistleblower policy or reporting improper governmental action policy had gotten a little unwieldy in terms of there was a section in the policy that purported to list every potential state agency that you might report a concern to. And that would include telephone numbers and, positions within the agency. And we all know that that information doesn't remain static and it becomes quickly outdated. And so the objective of the revisions to 8.15 was just to streamline the whistleblower policy and to make it more understandable and clear for employees and to point them, to the appropriate agencies or authorities in terms of reporting public employment concerns. And then section 8.16, this is a new section. It's unfortunately one that's become important in today's day and age. And so it's a new policy that just outlines the city's zero tolerance of workplace violence and outlines the procedures and expectations with respect to reporting and handling of workplace violence scenarios. We also added a new section 8.17 with respect to the possession of weapons. This is always a hot topic. And interestingly enough, after we got done or what we thought was finalizing the weapons policy, we learned that the legislature adopted substitute House Bill 1491, which now restricts public employers from searching public employee vehicles parked on its property. And so we had to go back in and revamp the weapons policy, but the weapons policy is such that it restricts employees from carrying dangerous weapons while on duty or while in city vehicles and implement safeguards to the greatest extent permitted by law. And then chapter 9 relating to updates and revisions.
Councilor File.
Yep.
I just have a quick question relating to weapons prohibited. Many times individuals can carry mace, for example, as a tool to ensure their safety when exiting their vehicle or walking to the bus stop and arriving at work. Is there an exemption for this?
There is.
Thank
and
you.
In fact, that was a comment that was received, I think, during the employee comment period. And so, yes, there is an exception for those type of scenarios.
Thank you. I must have overlooked it.
Okay, so then chapter 9, updates and revisions relating to discipline, termination, and pre-termination hearings. Really the major change there, and I think Rob is going to talk a little bit more about that in his presentation, was the addition of an express authorization for the city manager to negotiate separation and release agreements under appropriate circumstances. And then finally, Appendix B, this is just for ease purposes, we've incorporated the DOT's drug and alcohol testing policy for the information of those who are impacted by it, which is primarily CDL holders. So I think that's, the 30,000 foot view in terms of our legal changes. If there are any other questions. Okay, I'll turn it back over to Rob.
Councilor Baker.
Yes. Does this employee manual cover the council?
No.
No.
No. Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to part 2 of the presentation, the compensation related updates. So we did have an internal process after Kathy and I and the leadership team made proposed changes. We brought those changes forward to our coworkers and gave them an opportunity to look at the changes and offer their input. Kathy and I held 3 workshops with employees that they could come in, they could attend voluntarily, and there were some really good questions asked, also some input asked and provided. So a lot of these that you're going to see here are requests from our employees, and most importantly, the FLSA non-exempt employees, which means the employees that are eligible for overtime. So employees who take care of our streets and parks and answer our phones and things like that. Most of these requests that you're going to see came from them. So the first one is including leave in the calculation of 40 hours work for the purpose of calculating overtime. They did some comparison work and found that other cities commonly include leave in the calculation of the 40 hours for the purpose of calculating overtime. Also, right now, our accrual limit per employee on comp time is 40 hours, and they found some data from other cities that showed that that's low. And so they're proposing to bring it up to 80, and I agree with them. Also, for employees that are on standby pay, and so that's one employee at a time. We only have one employee at a time on standby pay, and they tend to be our maintenance workers who have to respond to emergencies. They get a 3-hour minimum call out when they're actually called out to a scene. What they're requesting is that if they can handle it by phone or by computer, that they get a 1-hour minimum call out. And the main reason for that is it's not as simple as just answering a call and then hanging up. They usually have to wait for an agency to call them back, and then they often have to make other phone calls too, and they want to be paid for the time that they're waiting for the call back or waiting for people to respond, things like that. Also, right now, the standby pay is $55 a day, and the idea is to allow me to increase that by up to the same percentage that's given employees for their cost of living increases each year. Also, a request to consider standby employees to take home a vehicle. Their main argument there is improving the response times. What this policy does is it doesn't grant that outright. It gives the city manager authority to allow for such a program if there's a good business case for it, and policies and procedures would need to be developed in advance before such a program could be implemented. Similar to regular standby pay, we have emergency standby pay, and that's for things like inclement weather and other disasters and emergencies. And that rate is $65 a day. And in those situations, we actually have more than one employee usually on emergency standby pay. And they're requesting that that amount be able to go up by the COLA annually. One change in benefits is right now the employees pay the $2 to $4 difference in the monthly premium between dental plan A and dental plan F, which both of which are offered through the Association of Washington Cities Benefits Consortium. And this policy to have the employees pay the difference was made quite a few years ago when the change was made. But the difference between the two plans has become so small, it's more of an administrative burden at this time to track that and make those deductions. So I'm recommending that the city pay the full dental premium, which is common among cities for the city to pay the dental premium. And then section 5.52 increases the dollar amounts for length of service awards. It's been about 6 or 7 years since that program was established, and so I'm proposing to raise those service award amounts to a higher level, and you'll see those higher levels in section 5.5.2. Also, I'm proposing, mainly for efficiency purposes, a business meeting allowance in lieu of submitting reimbursements, and that'd be a rare, very limited situation for executive level employees. Also proposing that this was a request of our non-exempt employees, that because of the sacrifice that needs to be made to work holidays, especially the 4th of July and Christmas and other holidays, that those employees that are required to work on holidays receive double time instead of time and a half. I'm recommending that come forward for your consideration. And then our employees receive a clothing and a boot allowance. Our maintenance workers do, I should say. The ones that are out in the field and really roughing up their clothing and getting in, having to do some heavy duty work. And we currently allow them that allowance, but they're just asking that it be increased by the same percentage as COLA each year. And lastly, as Kathy mentioned, section 9.6 would give the city manager to enter into limited severance agreements with a max authority of 40,000. Since I've been here as a city manager, I haven't had the need to do that, but there could be a time where that's necessary, and so I'm proposing that authority be granted. There's a table in your packet in the agenda bill that talks about the cost impacts of the compensation related changes, and that's up here on the screen as well.
And that's overall.
Yeah, and you'll see two columns. One is likely and one is more pessimistic.
Councilor Sherman.
Yeah, I had kind of the same question because, for example, 731, the tuition reimbursement, I think that's a per person, right? I mean, I just read through the policy. Does that mean we anticipate that one person on average will take advantage of that in a year? Is that kind of what you mean?
What we did is we had finance look at historic usage, and sometimes employees don't take advantage, sometimes they do. And so kind of based on the average, that was how they came up with it. But it's supposed to be a total amount citywide.
Right. So if they were taking an average, I mean, this would assume the average is one person. So I just want to make sure we are talking about the total, not the per person. So
my understanding is it's the total. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So next steps would be for you to give direction on the personnel policies manual and how you'd like to proceed. And the plan is to have it brought back to you for adoption at the May 22nd regular city council meeting.
Questions, comments? Councilmember Kugler and then Councilmember Marshall.
I have a question about how standby works. Is it for non-exempt employees only? Okay, and so they get a pay for the entire day, and then they might get like the minimum hour if they get a call. Am I following this right?
Yeah, they get paid $55 a day, and it's only one employee at a time. And it's for them to be available to respond to emergency calls. And they have to be within 1 hour of the city. And they have to refrain from, drinking alcohol and being in a situation where they can't respond and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Marshall.
I'm in favor of retaining our existing policies on 564 or proposed 564, which is the business meeting reimbursements or business meeting allowances. I think that we should have the receipts submitted so that we have greater transparency, so we know and have a record of what the administration is spending the money or who they're spending the money with and where. I just favor greater transparency on that instead of making it an allowance.
I can second that.
That wasn't the motion. Councilor File?
I was recognizing what you were saying. Thank you.
Councilor Shepard?
Yeah, the most costly item you did make a passing comment on it was the take-home vehicle for standby employees. This isn't, if we approve these, we're not automatically going to do that. That's a discretion. But you still believe that even that way, the likely is 10,000 up to 12,900, almost 13,000, because
That's right. Yeah, there has to be a strong business case for it.
and you think that there would be a strong business case in that magnitude is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'd really want to see an improvement in customer service and especially response times. And we'd want to have some data to show that. And 5,000 of that cost is a one-time cost to equip and secure the vehicle so that it can be taken home and stored outside securely.
Okay. It just seems like a little bit of a logistics nightmare and liability nightmare. I mean, I'm just thinking people taking them home. I don't know. It just seems like
Yeah,
there's a lot.
You're right. There is a lot to
that's-
consider.
Yeah,
And then
right.
There is
yeah.
the liability and the insurance
Yeah,
issues and all that
exactly.
kind of stuff would need to be worked out.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm, well, I mean, I suppose if all of those things are worked out, then it could make sense. Okay.
We would
thanks.
need to adopt a pretty extensive policy on it. We wouldn't just say, here, take your, we'd have to spend quite a bit of time finding out how to best write the policy, figure out what other cities do and things like that.
I would just add that it's not uncommon for municipalities or special purpose districts to allow take-home vehicle for, certain circumstances. So it's not unheard of. It can be worked out if that is the direction the city wants to go.
Deputy Mayor?
I just needed a further clarification because my understanding was it's just kind of permission to pursue this. My understanding when I heard this item was likely 0, but if it were implemented, if city manager chose to pursue this policy, it's opening the door to being able to do that, but not necessarily implementing it. Did I understand?
Take home?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. It would give me the authority to implement, but no guarantees that I would actually implement it.
So likely could be 0 in the way I heard it.
Yeah, if I decide not to do it, then it's 0, yeah.
Given the cumbersome nature of it, that was kind of my understanding of the direction that would be, but it opens the door to be able to do so in the event that we want to. Okay. I don't mean to be leading. I'm just trying to understand how I understood it. Like the high end is high, the likely end, I interpreted it differently. And so I'm sorry for parsing this so much. So do you think it's most likely that we would pursue this with that door open?
I'm not convinced yet that we would pursue it. Show me the data. I need to be convinced that there's a good business case and I'm not there yet.
Okay, so I'm hearing likely 0. That's my interpretation of what you've said.
At this point, yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Marshall and Councilor Kugler?
I appreciate the great points by Councilmember Srebnick and Deputy Mayor. I'm just thinking of weighing the pros and cons and your discretion versus taking a vehicle home and the liability and everything else involved versus, hey, we're building this facility for it, the public works facility where it normally should be. So just a note of a concern.
Councilor Kugler?
I'm wondering what the costs are for the take-home vehicle. You explained the 5,000, but are the other additional costs like wear and tear on the vehicle and mileage? And if we didn't give staff the vehicle, then are they expensing mileage and wear and tear on their own vehicles?
Right now, they're covering it at their own cost. they drive their personal vehicles and it's at their own expense to the city. Back.
And they're not reimbursed for that?
That's right.
Because
That's considered normal commute time. So they
Oh.
drive to the city to retrieve the vehicle. Once they're in the city vehicle, it becomes city time and they're compensated accordingly.
Any other comments, questions? Councilmember File?
So given we have a decent response time for responding to emergencies and inclement weather, I'm not yet in support of a take-home vehicle for standby employees. I have seen where it's been, helpful if a person was, if, for example, a chief or a sheriff has been on call, they will tend to check out a vehicle. We don't necessarily have that circumstance in Kenmore. The only thing I can think of is for really significant inclement weather, where a person may have a vehicle that wouldn't necessarily be able to make it through, half a foot or a foot of snow, where this might be an instance where I think the city discretion and checking out a vehicle would be appropriate. I don't know that I'm ready to just do a blanket policy on that. And I do support tuition reimbursement as, this is an equity reducer and helps further bring up potential employees in the pipeline and invest in local workers. So, and that's something I can support. I'm not yet comfortable with the double on-call time difference. And that's just kind of where I'm at. Thanks.
Other comments? Councilmember Kugler?
do you want just like all of our feedback? I'll share my thoughts if that's helpful then. In general, I think most of these proposed changes for me are like acceptable and reasonable. I do think I agree with Councilmember Marshall that the business meeting allowance, like submitting expenses does give us more of a track record and transparency for how money is being spent. I also understand that sometimes spending time on expense reports is time consuming, but I think that I think overall I think the benefit is there for our community. And then I think the take home vehicle, because of the cost and if the business case isn't there, like I'm agreeable to you evaluating that and making a decision. But it sounds like maybe keeping it as it is makes most sense.
Deputy Mayor.
I'm just doing a quick cost calculation in my head about the hour when expense report time was brought up. It did draw attention to my mind. Just say if 2 expense reports were calculated a month on the low end, that would be, I'm just spitballing with, hourly plus insurance and all the other things. It could be, I mean, I'm just, that could be $200 a month just right there for filling out those reports. Or I'm just guessing, I'm just putting a projection out there. So it hadn't dawned on me before, but I can see it's almost a wash when you look at it in that way.
Yeah, I think the numbers that you have in front of you, I think both columns are pessimistic. I think that you might either experience a wash or even a savings. I have one employee in mind that I think if they truly tracked all their mileage and other expenses, it might actually be more than what I'm proposing here. And so the savings would be, could possibly be a wash or a savings if we implemented this.
Thank you for that clarification. That's kind of what I was doing with my math. Thank you.
Councilor Kugler?
Well, the other thing is, if we were to give just the $400 allowance, they would be taxed on that, right? Whereas
Correct.
in the other case, it's in favor of the staff member to just get fully reimbursed. Okay.
There's also the efficiency argument though, and that is, you know, time spent by the employee tracking all this and then finance processing it. So I'm also trying to be efficient on the administrative end as well.
Any other comments? Speaking for myself, I'm generally comfortable with what you're proposing, Rob. I think it's thoughtful and I think it's responsive to, you know, the needs raised up, especially by some of your maintenance workers and public works folks. And I appreciate that. I know that being on call is never that easy because you are essentially limiting yourself quite a bit on what should be your day off. And so I think compensating that fairly makes a lot of sense. I'm inclined to give you the ability to figure out if the take-home vehicle makes sense, because I trust you. I'm not as inclined to give it to a random future city manager, if we're just being completely frank here. But overall, I'm generally happy with where you've landed on this. I think it's thoughtful and I think it's obviously not that easy. And I think you put a lot of work and thought into this. So I appreciate what you brought to us. Any other comments, questions? The direction just muddy and.
Yeah, so for council direction, do you mind if we just go through each one at a
Sure.
time? Okay. All right. So the first item, the calculation of overtime, I'm not hearing any objection to that.
Seeing any objection?
And then increasing comp time limit to 80 hours.
Not saying anything.
The 1 hour callback with they handle the call at, you know, by phone or computer. Ability to increase the standby pay by COLA. And by vehicle take home, giving the city manager authority. Not sure what the direction is here.
Yeah, can we have thumbs up, thumbs down on the take home vehicle? Yeah, the authority. Okay. Yeah.
Thumbs up, okay. And then same with regular standby pay, allowing emergency standby pay to go up by COLA. Okay. Dental plan premium. The length of service awards. And the business meeting allowance.
Thumbs up, thumbs down on business meeting allowance.
I can't see the thumbs.
Yeah, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 up. Yeah, I see 4 up, so.
Okay.
Councilor File.
Mr. Mayor, I also heard a request for greater transparency in that item. So with that, that piece that there would be, you know, record cemented receipts.
Those are two mutually exclusive things you're proposing. You're either giving the person the allowance, not making them do the reporting, or you're making them do the reporting and getting reimbursed. The two things are separate asks. The allowance takes, well, I mean, I'm not going to explain to city managers.
I understand an allowance, but I would just hope that there would be receipts for, you know, the business related expenses. That way we can track if we are hitting the mark or not, and be able to use that as a data point in the future should we need to expand it.
I mean, I think you're actually making an argument against the allowance. Because that undermines the entire point of the system, if I understand the city manager.
That's
correctly.
right, yeah.
So I think maybe there might have been some misunderstandings on that one. So I'm gonna ask folks again on the allowance, thumbs up, thumbs down.
I have a,
Deputy Mayor?
I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand early enough. Just a point of clarification. A person receiving this would have the calendar would be public attendee to conferences and things like that. If we ever did need to do research, would that be available? Just because that could give an that might be able to provide some basis.
Councilor Marshall? Oh, sorry, I thought you, or were you pointing out Deputy Mayor?
Oh, no, I didn't have a question, but that brings up, I guess, receipts then generated by employee business would be subject to public records request anyway? City attorney? Probably.
Probably, yes.
Councilor Sherman?
Yeah, if that's the case, this seems infeasible. I mean, because if people are getting an allowance and not asked to submit receipts, those receipts they're gonna disappear. I mean, people aren't gonna keep them. So I don't see how this is workable. I don't know how other cities do this then.
I mean, you could argue that you could be saving the receipts, but not actually processing the reimbursements, which is a whole, I mean, that's taking a piece of paper, putting an envelope versus taking a piece of paper, filling out a form and getting it signed, doing all of that.
So there is, it depends on the schedule, but there is a requirement to retain records subject to the time period in the schedule. The interesting thing is that's like 300 pages long. So what a receipt would be for a meeting where you don't actually need the receipt. I almost wonder if it's transitory, and transitory just means it has little time value. So maybe they could get rid of it as soon as they needed to or immediately thereafter. So I can't answer that now, but I can look into it for the future meeting.
And
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear all of
I'm
that.
sorry. So short answer, I don't know the retention schedule of a receipt that wouldn't be necessary under an allowance scheme. I pose that maybe it's even transitory, so it could be thrown away under state law. I don't know the specific answer tonight, but I can look into that.
Things like mileage could be looked up. We could find out, where the meeting was and, the distance from City Hall, things like that can be discovered pretty easily. Well, not about easily, but they could be figured out. We're looking at, savings or cost to the city over time.
Don, I'm just wondering if the record would actually be the allowance.
That's a really good question. I don't know. It depends on, so it sounds like here, there's a policy discussion on whether or not there should be some sort of receipt retention. If that was put into the policy, then I think, yes, it is probably the public record. I said probably because almost everything is a public record. So yes, the allowance is definitely the public record. Whether or not the receipts that someone got when they were on behalf of the city, acting on behalf of the city, also public record, probably yes.
Quick question for the city manager. So under your contract, you receive a vehicle allowance of some sort.
That's correct.
And I assume that supersedes tracking mileage and putting in reimbursements for that.
That's right.
Okay. Does that create any public records issues on the city's side or on your side?
No records are created other than my calendar.
Okay. Deputy Mayor and then Councilor Marshall.
I think council would appreciate maybe an estimate of what say in the event that we had something like that in place, what the current expense is for submitting claims and reimbursements for these, for just like what, you know, when I said spitball, what it looks like, maybe a frame of reference for what the actual cost is today to administer reimbursements in this way might be a benefit.
Councilor Marshall?
Yep. I think it's important to note that these allowances or the receipts we're talking about would include lunches or meals and hotels. That's what I'm thinking of. Thanks.
It wouldn't include hotels. That would just be, you know, daily business, routine type things. Yeah.
Rob, I think I'm hearing that we probably need some more information on this to get comfortable on this particular piece. Councilmember File?
Thank you. So I just want to add some clarity from my point of perspective and share that absolutely support, clothing and boot allowances for our workers. Absolutely. In the broader sense that this item is written, should a governmental employee receive a larger allowance of some type, we have seen abuses of use of public funds by governmental officials, not necessarily in Kenmore, but in the broader sense of, the state or the US. And that's why we have transparency laws in place as a kind of the gold star standard to ensure that, expenditures are not being spent on bottles of wine, drinks, things you might not otherwise normally spend money on when doing governmental work, or that are otherwise prohibited by city elected officials or staff. So in that sense, I would just prefer transparency. So I'm looking at the differences between the language that's provided here and what it could additionally also mean if applied to a different sense. For example, if a governmental employee had a allowance budget beyond just clothing and boots.
Any other comments? I mean, Rob, I'm kind of looking at this. Oh, sorry. Were you on one? I apologize. Deputy Mayor.
I raised it just behind you so you could, it was behind your head. So no worries on that. My question is, if an employee were to have this, let me read this, allowance, they would not submit reimbursements at all for Monday through Friday standard work meetings.
That's correct.
So in a sense, say if it were $200 a month, that might be a lot less, I would think. I'm just thinking, I mean, that would be a cap on what they could spend. The city's only, that puts a cap on spending versus what reimbursements might be.
Oh, I see what you're saying. This, yeah, like reimbursements could be, I don't know, pick a number, 500 a month, but if it was at 400 a month, it would limit the city's exposure.
Yeah.
Councilor Files' comment actually reminded me of, fairly standard practice with government travel, which is, you have the option usually when you're traveling of either doing direct reimbursement or receiving a per diem, where you just get a flat amount per day and you can spend it on, you can spend it on your needs without having to save receipts and turn all those in. And that's a fairly standard practice in a lot of business travel and governments also. I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but I just see a similarity there.
You're talking about like travel to conferences and
yeah,
things like
yeah,
that.
business trips, things like that.
Right. Yeah.
But what I think I'm hearing is that we need to have a little bit more information on this piece to make a decision. Okay. Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yeah, and actually, your comment makes me think of maybe a path forward. I wonder if there's a way to, and maybe that's how you've based the 400, to kind of give us a sense of what the historical, and maybe that's what Deputy Mayor was saying. I mean, she was talking more about the processing cost. I'm thinking more about the, like, what are the normal expenditures? You know, and if all you're trying to do is kind of smooth the line, you know, I could be more maybe supportive of it.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. The last three items were the double time on holidays.
Any objections on that one? Not seeing any.
And then allowing the boot and clothing allowance to go up by COLA.
Not seeing any objections.
And then severance agreement authority.
Not seeing anything.
Okay.
All right.
All right. What I'll do is at the May 22nd City Council meeting. Yeah, or either May 15th or May 22nd, I'll come back with the data you're asking for. And then hopefully we can get this whole document across the finish line.
That's great.
We're excited for. This is going to be a huge help administratively to our organization, because there's a lot of good information that's now in writing that's going to help us make decisions and guide the organization. So thank you for your work on this.
Thank you for your work on this. I'm sure you did way more than we have. Staff reports.
Yeah, I'll just stay right here if that's all right. So you heard during public comment that the Cadman facility did some testing on their emissions, and we just became aware of those results late last week. We want to make sure the public is informed. Oh yeah, thanks Kathy, appreciate it. Okay. We want to make sure that the public's informed. And so we're working on some information that we can put on our website and like in an e-newsletter article that gives the public the latest update on that. So, and then two really pieces of good news. I'll give one and then Stephanie will give another. So our climate action plan manager started today. Her name is Nina Rasmussen. And she is eager and ready to go. We'll see if she shows up tomorrow. Sometimes, you know, no, I'm kidding. No, but yeah, we're excited to have her on board, and she knows she has her work cut out for her. So, Stephanie.
Hi, just sharing that we have a Housing and Human Services manager who is going to be starting with us on May 22nd. So can't wait for you to meet her.
Second.
And that's all we have.
All right, council members' reports and comments. Councilmember Baker.
I have nothing at this point.
Councilmember Marshall.
Thanks to everyone involved, the city staff and everybody, absolutely everybody involved in opening Juarez this Saturday. It's great. It's great. And also just a suggestion. I know that Kelly Shalin is going to be doing more work on the land acknowledgement and some research on that. Also, I suggest we can take a look at the land acknowledgements that are provided on the Tulalip tribe website, on the Muckleshoot tribe website, and the Duwamish. There are differences, there are important differences, but at least it's a starting point to think about. And we can also think about the possible inclusivity in using the term Coast Salish. There are advantages and disadvantages to that, just sort of highlighting that, and then the issue of federal recognition or not included in that, but just sort of thinking about those things. Thank you.
I think we're discussing that on next week. Councilmember Kugler.
Yeah, I don't have any updates today. Thank you.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yeah, I just want to thank Rob and all of the staff and Maureen, and that was a great ribbon cutting and just great event. And want to thank Sherry Baker and Fong and all the KWAC folks for making the waterfront activities fair go off as well.
Councilmember File.
Thank you. I did have a question for our city manager, and I really appreciate the updates tonight, but I do hope to have maybe more than just something on the website for our community. It would be nice to have some sort of a public meeting to be responsive to our community. We've had a great amount of our community come before us and reach out to our council, and that care very deeply about the air we breathe and our public health. And that's one of our duties we're elected to serve and uphold, is the public health and welfare of our community. So I'm hoping that we can have a public meeting and provide, what the report was, maybe have a public health specialist from King County, an environment and water, possibly, be able to explain what some of that means. Because it's one thing to have attorneys speak to people, it's another to have public health professionals talk about and address the issues of public health and air, and the air we breathe. And I think that's important to our community. So I'm hoping that you can support that. So I'm going to make the ask, and I hope that my fellow colleagues also might support this request.
Before you do, I would like our city attorney, Don Rayton, to weigh in on that.
So at this moment, if with the council's permission, if I could have some time to discuss this issue with the city manager and get back to you on that. As you know, we're also in an appeal with various parties, so it'd be important to take a little bit of time before moving forward in that direction.
I hear and respect that. I just think that there's a public notice that's out, or the report has reflected some differences in expectations and our community is concerned. Even if we are not the ones who are addressing that issue specifically, but having experts here and maybe even legal experts, it might be good to be able to at least address some of the public concerns. And so I respect the time needed for our city attorney and our city executive to meet and discuss. And I look forward to that feedback or direction later. But I do hope that we can provide that opportunity for our community to hear a little bit more about what this really means, and what it means for them and what it means for the air they breathe. Other than that, I also support some greater involvement in the land acknowledgement. And I really appreciate our community member, Vicki Grayland, who has initially brought forth some recommendations to us and continues to provide an update by acknowledging our historic relevant past. I do think if we're going to have some direction by our DEI specialist, and we are going to be making decisions with a resolution, a proclamation, some sort of direction, the nothing about us without us is a really important rule to follow. And we can have all the best intent in the world as white and brown people who do not and may not have connections to tribes. And it's like having straight people make decisions about gay and lesbians and bisexual, queer and transgender people, or persons who have disabilities by people who are mobile. Nothing about us without us is a really important role. And I do think that we need to be conscientious of that. And if we have to make an individual invite to tribal elders to attend a meeting, even participate on feedback, I would welcome that. Thank you.
My understanding is that Shannon is reaching out to her contacts at the tribe and getting their involvement.
And again, we'll be having this discussion next week.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
First, I'm going to tag on the land acknowledgement. And I believe it may have been Victoria Grayland that pointed me in the direction to look here, but at University of Washington on their website in the engineering department, they do have YouTube videos that provide really great direction about land acknowledgements. I think there are about 6 short videos that are public. So I just thought for each of us, it's just a nice, accessible resource. I'm looking forward to hearing back from our city manager and city attorney related to what's happened at Cape Cadman. It's incredibly difficult not to talk about it. I think it's incredibly important to our community to understand, like Council Member Kyle stated, what the results were. We recognize there may be some, anyway, I think that I am going to say this. 4 years ago, we didn't we didn't have testing there, and the way that testing took place was through community action and working with Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. And it's important that our community knows that their voices matter, that their council listens, and that the only way that we can find out what's in the air we breathe is by having the agency, the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, be responsible for it. And I'm thankful that we at least were able to make the ask and find out, at least temporarily, what those results are. Thank you.
And I will add that I really appreciate all of the work that went into the ribbon cutting this weekend. It was a wonderful event. It was really great to see so many people out and enjoying the investments that we've made as a community together. It really just, it warms the cockles of my heart, if you will, to see people out there using what we've all built together. And yeah, I don't have anything else, so nothing more to come before us. Kenmore City Council is adjourned.